Hey, I'm Eric, I'm the explorer.
I'm Phil, I'm the folklorist.
And together we are setting out across the Empire State to explore the haunts and legends of New York.
Herkimer was the home of the Revolutionary War-era Fort Dayton. An archaeological dig looking for the fort turned up way more of Herkimer's past than ever expected. We explore what was found and the lost well at Herkimer's historic Four Corners.
Well, Phil, here we are back at this historic Four Corners in Herkimer. We had to come back because there's a lot more interesting stories we need to tell.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most important ones is a very little known secret that's been kept until last summer, when actually I was part of the team that uncovered it. So I'm going to show you a secret you just didn't know about Herkimer.
Well, let's go take a look. I've got to know. Phil, we are back here in Herkimer at the Sutor Mansion because you've got more stories to tell about Dr. Sutor and a really interesting archaeological find. Now, you were actually looking for Fort Dayton. Tell me first, what's Fort Dayton?
Fort Dayton is a colonial era fort that was one of the sort of stepping stones through the Mohawk Valley and through the frontier, because this was sort of the most western edge of the colonies at the time. So they built a small structure and these forts at the time. Fort Dayton is not what you're thinking of. It's not Fort Stanwix, it's not Fort Ticonderoga. Those are giant sensationalism forts. The colonial sort of frontier forts are a little bit larger than a house. And then they have stockade fencing, and they can build in other buildings and stuff, like they build the stockade around a couple barns and stuff. So you're looking at something that's maybe 40 feet by 40 feet. So it's really small. Now, thanks to the DAR and some of the documentation we had, we came here. Sue brought us in to sort of follow up on a previous archaeological dig, because in a 3-block radius here, Fort Dayton is here somewhere. Under this neighborhood.
We didn't know.
Nope. They have a marker out there, and that's about as general as it gets. We know it's here somewhere in the vicinity. So
you started digging, and what happened?
Well, we started off by following up on the previous archaeologists' test pits they ran. The first one that we came across as I was running the transit lines, I was like, okay, they struck down and they found what looked like a slab stone. I'm like, this looks like a foundation of something. We're going to expand over in a couple other test pits. And it got bigger. We expanded a couple more test pits, and it got bigger. And we got it completely uncovered. It was a capstone. We had discovered, out back of Sutor, a well that no one knew existed. And then, leave that with you, Sue. The history of Sutor, there's nothing in there except for that one property record, right?
Right, yes. About, let's see, 18... I can't remember, it's 33 or 43. I'm always transposing numbers. But anyway, that's the earliest we could find that the well is mentioned in the deeds.
And in the previous records, this area was, first it was Fort Dayton, then it was it the tavern or the general store next?
General store.
The general store, then it became a tavern, then it was all sort of torn down, and then Sutor decided to build his practice here.
Right.
Again, in the records, there's nothing about this well out here. So, when we start uncovering it as a dig last year, we start taking out the backfill. And after a couple of days, we get to a fresh layer, and we start pulling out intact artifacts. Medicine bottles, a few things here and there, some broken bottles, some few things like that. And then another day goes by, and then we start taking them out by the bucket full. Intact artifacts, intact medicine bottles, glass vials, sutures. What we knew about Sutor at the time is he was kind of a general practitioner. He may be a little bit OCD because his story of the lab coat.
Yes.
He would like to stick his hand in his pocket to open doors. So we knew a little bit about that. We don't have much else about his personality, what he did, or anything like that. So as we're digging, we start coming up with these connections. He's done everything we could possibly think of for medical. He's got dental instruments, he's got gynecological instruments, he's got all this stuff. There's even a record in there somewhere about him with kittens even, so he even did veterinary work.
So, now knowing little to nothing about archaeology, how rare is it to find the treasure trove that you found here?
It is absurd. It is literally a lightning strike, because like field school and college, I had some other friends that went down to Monticello to do their excavations, and over the period of 4 weeks, they had only recovered a single rusted nail from the period. That was it, nothing else. In the span of 4 days, we went from a few broken bottles and some slag and some usual things to literally hundreds of pipe stems, hundreds, or at least 200 plus intact glass bottles that not only could tell us what medicines were in them, but also who manufactured them. We now knew Sutor was connected very closely with L.B. Jones and the Herkimer Pharmacy, and all of these things are printed in there, and it just kept going. We've even found a very unique liquid soap dispenser from the 1800s. Did you even know that they had liquid soap back then?
I did not.
It just kept coming, and it's huge, because now we have all this information about Dr. Sutor that just wasn't there. It's like piecing it all together. And it is still that one little record about the well from like over a century and a half ago. Nobody knew this was only a foot underground.
Sue, what does it mean for you as a historian and a caretaker of Herkimer County's history to find something like that?
It's wonderful. You learned what artifacts were like back then. We didn't have any medical instruments of Dr. Sutor's. Of course, they were all in the well. Mm-hmm. They weren't in the collection. And we don't have a lot. We have his photograph, we have his record books here on the table, tells who his patients were, what their ailments were, how much it cost. So it's wonderful to see what type of things he did own. Mm-hmm. Stoneware jug, fully intact in the well. What we have, curtain rod,
a stove. One of the things that we were talking with Carol the other week about is like maybe that was the stove he had used to like do the burn tests.
Oh, maybe.
Because it was one of the cast iron burn stoves, so maybe. It's like all of these things, and the burn tests, of course, was for Roxy, and they believed where she was burning it and stuff. He was the medical examiner, so he would take and he had to do the tests. What would it take to burn or incinerate a bone? So we actually did find a lot of burned bones in there too, so maybe it's a little more plausible. But there's just so much that we now know, and it's all tied to everything here. And it's just this 1 foot underground little secret well, and that well is huge. It's 5.5 and a 5.5. It's like square granite stone, hand hewn, and it's 8 inches thick. And the inside is 24 by 24 with a smaller 6.5 by 6.5 hand hewn holes. And then we went down about 14 feet pulling stuff out constantly, which means the well had to have been intact when all this stuff was thrown in there. We have tons of fragile glass instruments, laboratory pipettes and everything like that. It's a sample that are still intact. And the only way that would occur is if there was water in there, throw them in. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in between that 1834 record and when it came over to the Historical Society, the idea of the well is just gone. So somewhere in between here and there is just filled in. So we're thinking about 1920s, about that time period, something like that.
Yeah, the water system came into Herkimer in late 1880, so there would be no need.
They would have need for a well.
Need for the well. Mm-hmm. Dr. Sutor died in 1925, left the mansion to his sister Mary Grace, and said that upon her death it would go to the Historical Society. And Mary Grace never married, Dr. Sutor never married, and so neither one ever used it as a home. It was used for his waiting room, doctor's office, and library. And so the society got the building in about 1938.
And it's been just
never
a
been
historical
lived in.
museum ever
Yep.
Ever
since.
since. It really got going in about 1974 when Jane Spellman became the director here and was able to get grants and things and got it built up to what it is today.
But all it started with this little, as again, 1 foot underground. It started with a small test pit done back in 2002. And it was just a strike on the side of the pit. So we just saw this little bit of stone, but okay, we'll do a line all across there. And it just snowballed. It's this little hidden thing that all of a sudden just filled in all of the history for Dr. Sutor and his connections and everything like that. So history, archaeology tied together so easily on this one.
Fascinating. Let's take a look at some of those artifacts.
Absolutely. We've got plenty.
Just 1 foot underground were boxes and boxes of hidden Herkimer history.
Absolutely, filling in all of the missing details on poor Dr. Sutor and everything that we just didn't know. And not only that, it transcends multiple properties, multiple levels of history, all just 1 foot away.
That's what the Haunts and Legends of New York is all about. If you're enjoying this series, give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button as well. And this is the part where Phil says check out the comments below and tell us where to go next.
Sometimes.